Welcome, Notre Dame fans, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. I am Vince D'Addario. I am the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com, and joined with me, as always, is our football analyst. Our publisher. See, getting everything mixed up today, my friend.
I promoted myself.
He's now officially and has always been the publisher of irishbreakdown.com. That's Brian Driscoll. Brian, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing great, man. Doing great. It's not the prettiest day here in South Bend, so it's a good day for us to be inside doing a podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're not kidding. So baseball is on the back burner, and we're going to talk some football, some spring football. And we are just about a third of the way through spring, Brian.
We actually are a third of the way. We're 5 practices through.
Right.
So,
it's 15,
we are now. Yeah, we're now a third of the way.
And we are going to hit one of our favorite topics, and it's the offensive line. And it's offense. Obviously, that's a big bonus for you and I. But the offensive line is a big question mark this year, not necessarily because of talent, but because of we don't really know who is going to be lining up.
No clue.
On September 5th.
You know who else doesn't have a clue?
The
Brian Kelly,
staff.
Tommy Reese, and Jeff Quinn.
Right.
I mean,
which is not a problem now.
Right.
But it could be later.
And that's kind of why we wanted to do this show, because we're seeing a lot of opinions being formed among the fan base.
I'm sure.
Based on 3-minute selected video clips.
Which is not good.
Which have had between 15 to 25 clips each of practices where there are over 100 snaps, well over 100 snaps being taken. And so it's kind of like, usually a play is a highlight for someone, which means someone else got beat. It's just, and so the offensive line is going to struggle. It's going to be bad. And so what we wanted to do today was talk about the line. And we're going to talk about what we've seen in films, because there's no problem. I have no issue with people making evaluations based on what they've seen.
Sure.
But we shouldn't be making sweeping, conclusions. Like I had somebody say to me, well, it's clear Drew Pine's going to be the starter and Jack Cohn's struggling. Well, what makes you say that?
Right.
Well, Drew Pine's getting all the first team reps. No, he isn't. And number one, and number two, did you think they were going to bring in the grad transfer and just throw them into the number ones on the first practice? And what kind of message does that send to the returners? So I just think we all need to take a deep breath.
Sure.
Evaluate the highlight films, have fun looking at the highlight films.
Absolutely.
And there's things we can learn from the highlight films, but let's also remember that every position group is in a different stage of its development. And that's kind of the focus here. In my opinion, the offensive line is going to be the last group to get rolling.
I agree.
Because of the fact it lost 4 offensive starters. And look, if you think that I'm an anti-Quinn person, this would be the perfect opportunity for me to come in and say, and no Chris Watt and the offensive line is struggling. No, I expected the offensive line to struggle. If Harry Heastan was the offensive line coach,
absolutely,
the offensive line would be struggling for 2 reasons. One, you have 5 new starters. Because remember, Jared Patterson isn't practicing. So your best offensive lineman hasn't taken a snap all spring. Number 2, you're going against a pretty good flipping defensive line. I mean, we've said on record, this has a chance to be Notre Dame's best defensive line or one of their best defensive lines. And they're going against a bunch of guys that are moving around and a bunch of new dudes. So
they haven't played.
What were you expecting? If the offensive line was dominating right now, I'd be freaking super concerned about how bad the defense was going to be this season.
No question.
Because that's where we're at it. And so that's kind of the purpose of today's podcast is we want to talk about where the line is right now, what the expectation should be for the line right now, what we've seen on film, and then some of the things that are happening on the offensive line. What are the good things about it? What are the negative things about it? And then we're going to have some fun with it at the end and make a prediction. So that's why today we're kind of talking about the line again, because there's just I'm seeing a lot of angst amongst folks that are, the offensive line is really struggling. And I'm like, that's kind of a good thing. Yeah. Because if it wasn't, then I would say a lot more about the defensive line than it would the offensive line.
So I want to ask you kind of brought it up what our outline is going to be, but I want to start there. I want to start with where should the line be right now trying to replace 4 starters, and where are they right now trying to replace 4 starters? Because I think those are 2 separate questions. So I want to get your opinion on that first.
Well, I actually think, based on some of the conversations I've had and some of the stuff we've seen on film, I actually think they're in a decent place right now. I think, again, there's the expectation, and then there's where they are if you're just evaluating on their play. Where they are for evaluating on the play is a different answer. Where they are right now, I'm actually encouraged by it. I think we've seen some guys that maybe the coaches weren't expecting to necessarily be as good as they've been, as they are. Blake Fisher, for example, is a freshman. I'm hearing a lot of great things about him from people that have been at practice. I think he's a little further along than they thought he would be. I think a veteran like Dylan Gibbons is battling a little harder to keep that job maybe than some people thought he would be. So there's some positives, but at the same time, that's based on expectation. The expectations were super low for this period in the spring. Now, when we get to August and September, the conversation needs to change.
Sure, absolutely.
But this is where you should expect this group to be, because, you say, well, you're replacing, all two of your three starting receivers. Well, receivers have to work together in that they all have their own individual responsibility. Now, you have to understand what the other guy is doing. And I talked about this in the receiver podcast yesterday, Vince, where if I am running the smash part of a smash concept, I have to know what the corner route's responsibilities are, because this is going to impact how I run my route.
Spacing,
I can't just
and all that
get open, know. And so offensive line, you're still doing your job.
Correct.
And your success is determined 100% by you. And then, of course, the quarterback throwing you the ball. On the offensive line, it's literally 5 parts as one. It's like a hand. I mean, you have 5 fingers, but it makes up one hand. And if one of them is broken, then you're not going to be as effective. Or if one of them's not, doesn't work or whatever, it's not going to be as effective.
Good analogy.
And so, thank you. And that's what's different about the offensive line even the defensive line. They work together, but they're not dependent upon each other as much as you have the offensive line. And so,
and I would even say, just to expound on that, the defensive line even works with the linebackers too.
Right.
I mean, those two really work together. Whereas the offensive line, those are 5 dudes that have to be on the same page. You can
100%.
add in a tight end there a little bit, but sometimes he's split out. He's not always there.
Right.
So those 5 offensive linemen have to be on the same page. They have to be moving as one group.
Right. And they affect each other more. So you talk about the defensive line working with the linebackers. If a guy lines up in a 3 technique and his job is to slant in the A gap, he can slant in the A gap whether the linebacker does his job and goes to the B gap or not. And now they both impact the success of the play, right? If the linebacker doesn't do his job, it impacts. So we're saying what receiver, and so it's not about, that it doesn't impact the result of the play, but what I am saying is it does impact what me doing my job as a guard. If I'm thinking I'm getting help, and everything in offensive line play, especially Notre Dame, is as much zone as they run, there's teamwork involved. And if I think I'm doing this, and then I step with one hand because I'm thinking I'm just using the flipper on the guy, right? Or I'm just, maybe I get time to work across his body. I don't have to reach him right away, but the right tackle I'm working with leaves too soon.
Right.
Then I'm going to look like I got my butt kicked.
Right.
Because people are like, did you see the right guard just get blown up the field? No, that wasn't the right guard's fault. He was thinking he was going to have help to his outside.
He took a double team step. That's what he's supposed to do. Right.
And so, that's where I say there's a much greater impact on everyone has to be on the same page. And it takes time. It takes time for this group to get to that level. And so anyone that's worried about the offensive line through 5 practices shouldn't be. If we're still as concerned today as, on May 1st as we are today, then I get a little bit nervous.
Sure.
And if I start hearing things in mid-August about how the offensive line is getting whipped every day, then I'm going to get a little bit nervous. But on practice 5, and they're going actually through practice 6 as at the time of we're recording this, they're wrapping up practice 6. It's one of those things where I'm just not as concerned about it right now, because this is where I expected them to be. I expected them to be behind the other groups. And that's just, it's okay. It's okay. Give it time. Now, as far as the other part of that question, Vince,
I think the where they should be part of that question is very multi-layered, and we're going to get into it a little bit moving forward. But I think they're not even sure what each position each guy is playing.
Right.
Come fall.
Right.
Right. So I think that
They're
really
not
affects
even what guys are going to be by the end of the spring.
right, and then that affects the play of, okay, well, I'm not sure who's going to be to my right. I'm not sure who's going to be to my left. So I don't have enough time to really, gel with those guys. And again, we're going to get into that a little bit deeper in a second, but I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think that you're going to see some missed assignments and some missteps early because, is Josh Lugg going to stay at right guard? I don't know.
At right tackle, you mean?
Or right tackle. I mean, we don't know. Like, you know what I mean? He's going to get reps at both. And so, that there's a lot going on there and it takes time. It just, once they settle on where everybody's going to be, then you can start making some criticisms or some praises and things, because then they can start working together more often. So we do get the 3-minute videos, Brian, and it's kind of funny because a lot of it looks a little bit like NFL films, following the ball in the air and, things of that nature. And it's a very tight picture. And so it is very difficult to analyze the offensive line, at least from my standpoint. I'm sure you are much better at it than I am.
No.
But it is very difficult with the video that they're giving us, okay? So from the limited amount of video that we get and the limited views and the tight views and the NFL films look of it all, what are you taking away from the film up to this point through 5 practices?
Well, I think the one is that the offensive line is getting tested by fire. I mean,
oh my gosh, that's a great place to start, by the way.
Hey, Tosh Baker, you're a redshirt freshman. You played 7 snaps last year. We're going to have you go against Isaiah Foskey all day, every
the whole
day.
time. Yes.
And when we take him out, we're going to put in Jordan Botelho, and who just plays like a maniac. So, hey, good luck with that, right? and that's a good thing. Hey, Dylan Gibbons and Andrew Kristofic and Quinn Carroll, and you guys are trying to win the guard job. Hey, have fun blocking Jason Adamiola and Kurt Heinisch every day.
Right.
It's a battle. They're losing a lot, but that's how you learn. I mean, it's just like we talked about the quarterback. You try to make a throw and you get picked off. You say, okay, well, I thought I could make that throw. Now I know. Right. I'd rather you think you can make it and try it in practice in March than try that on a Saturday in September where you think, well, you know what? I think I can make that throw. Nope. Couldn't make it in practice. Can't make it now.
Right.
And that's a good thing about practice. And you say, okay, well, I'm getting my butt whooped by some really good players. So what do I got to do to get better? What do I got to do to get on that level? Where's my technique lacking? Is my timing lacking? Is my, my angle of departure lacking? And I think we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing guys thinking that, hey, I'm pass setting. I see Tosh Baker pass set, and he thinks he's in good position, and all of a sudden, oh, wow, that number 7 guy's a lot faster than I thought, and I got to get to him. And so those are the things that they're struggling with, and I think it is a struggle. We're seeing Blake Fisher do some really good things, but then we see him just having trouble with the speed on the outside, which is what I expect from a freshman. I think the concerning thing for me, I guess if I am going to say an area where I am concerned so far, is the interior guys are getting whipped a lot. From just on the film we've seen. I mean, they could be ripping off 60-yard runs and the other clips we're not seeing, right? For all we know. But I think at least some of those would make it onto the highlight tape. I think that says a lot about how good the defensive tackles are, and we've been raving about how good the D tackles are going to be.
Right.
But I think another part is just, and we'll get into this a little bit, but how much they're moving guys around is making it very hard for those guards to get situated. That's concerning for me. And I think we're seeing Zeke Correll needs to continue to improve. There's areas of improvement needed for his game. But I also think they're competing and they're battling. And what I do like from the film, and this is where you can learn a little something about alignment, is when guys are getting beat, they're still battling. They're still trying to keep hands on. There's a play I saw, I think it might have been a Tyler Buckner play, where it looked like 2-3 offensive linemen got beat. But I don't think it would have been a sack in a game because they fought to stay engaged. And so even though they got beat up the field, it allowed Tyler Buckner to get out of the pocket.
Right.
That's progress. Because the first practice or two, we weren't seeing that. We were seeing like a meet me at the football party from the front set, from the front floor.
Which is fun to see if you're watching for the defense.
Yeah.
I mean, and I would rather have it this way because we know what the defense should be.
Yeah.
And we know what the offense is trying to be. And so you have to expect the defense to be better. And this is only going to make the offensive line better moving forward to go against this kind of competition, because I would rather have that than, Tosh Baker just dominating whatever defensive end that Notre Dame can bring out. And then they get into a real game. They're like, oh, this is what game speed is.
Right.
And then they're just getting beat the whole time.
Right.
And you get complacent when that happens. You know what I mean? And so I'm okay with them just bringing and just over
Heat
and over and over, because they're going to see that in the regular season.
Yeah. Vince, it reminds me a lot of, and you tell me if you agree or disagree with this, but this reminds me a lot of the situation that the defensive line found themselves in the spring of 2017, Mike Elko's first spring. And he kind of talked about that. Like, you're going to have a lot of come to Jesus moments when you're playing on the defensive line and you're going against, Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey and Alex Bars and Sam Mustipher in that group. I mean, because that was a darn good offensive line.
Yes.
And there's no Quentin Nelson on the defensive line, but the point is, this is a really talented group. And there are guys on the defensive line that are battling for jobs. I mean, Myron Tungavaloa, Justin Adamiola, Jason Adamiola, Riley Mills. I mean, the exception of Kurt Heinisch and Isaiah Foskey, I mean, there's still a lot of questions about who's going to, is Jason Adamiola, he's going to play, but he's going to get 20 reps, or he's going to start getting 50 reps,
Right, absolutely.
And so there's a lot of competition there, and there's a lot of linebackers battling for jobs. So they're going against guys that are also fighting for things. And so I think it is that kind of same trial by fire. And I think that made that 2017 defensive line better. Having to go against Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey every day. It's why that group, I think, played a little better than a lot of people thought going into that next season, because there was a lot of new guys there. Remember, the 2016 defensive line had Romeo Aguara on it. It had Isaac Rochelle on it. It had Jerron Jones on it. It had a lot of veteran players that were gone. And so, you had Dalen Hayes stepping into a more prominent role, Julian Aguara, Khalid Kareem, guys that were primarily backups in the past. We're now, Jonathan Bonner's another one. We're now being thrust into prominent roles. And Jerry Tillery was the only kind of quote unquote returning starter type of player coming back from that group. So that group had to learn the hard way of what it takes to play big boy football. And that's what the offensive line is going through. And I think that's a great thing for them. And like you said, Vince, keep turning up the heat. I think there comes a time and a place where you need to give them a practice where you're setting them up for success. And I think that is a thing that Jeff Quinn, Tommy Rees, Marcus Freeman, and Mike Elson need to sit down one of these days and say, hey, look, my guys, the defensive coach say, hey, my guys are feeling pretty good about themselves. We need to, let's really make it harder on them today. What can you guys do? And hey, you know what? My guys need some success. They've been getting their butts whooped a lot. They need some positives. And you work on that. So, hey, we're going to do some things today. We're going to purposely put them in bad calls on the defensive line and see how they learn, see how they battle. So, I mean, there are times when you want to set your offensive lineman up for success. You don't just want to get the dog kicked out of them every single day. But at some point in time, you say, okay, what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to sit back and keep getting whooped every day? Or are you going to figure something out?
Right.
And I think that this is a great testing period. And this is what spring ball's for. Like, I just wish that people understand spring ball is not about our getting ready to go play a game on Saturday. I don't care if a quarterback throws a pick. I don't care if an offensive lineman gets beat. I don't care if a cornerback gets beat. We don't know what they're working on that day.
Exactly.
They may be in a period where they're saying, hey, look, we're going to play press man today, and we're going to really put them in a lot of tough spots. And coaches do that all the time. Good coaches do anyway. They don't always design practice for success. And I don't think that's always – I mean, there are days to do that, but there are days you're going to say, hey, look, you throw everything at us. I remember, Vince, I've told you this. This was even during the season. I had my head coach, Joe Fincham at Wittenberg. I was running scout team, and he's like, Driscoll, I want you to throw everything you can think of at us today. I'm just designing the most bizarre blitzes and just – and it was just – because this point was we need to throw some fire at them, because if they can figure that out, then when we get to Saturday, we're going to be all right.
Right.
Well, the spring is an exaggerated version of that, because there is no game you have to worry about. We got to figure out who we have. What do we have? We got to figure out how's this guy going to handle getting burnt a few times. So hey, Coach Rees, what are you guys working on today? Oh, we're working on this concept. Okay, cool. During this period, we're going to get ourselves in the worst possible calls imaginable and see how guys handle it. That's what I think coaches should do, and good coaches do. You don't do it all the time. And so when you look at the offensive line, this is about them learning. This is about trial by fire. This is about seeing not only who handles it physically, but who handles it mentally well.
Yes.
And that's where they're at. So if the offensive line wasn't getting whooped right now, Vince, I'd be very, very concerned. And it's going to make them better. And like I said, we saw this with the defensive line in 2017 when they had to go against Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey and those guys, Alex Barr, Sam Mustipher, Tommy Kramer, Robert Hainsey every single day.
So, Brian, one of the things that I want to get your opinion on, and we've tossed it around a little bit during the pre-spring talks that we've had. Brian Kelly was very upfront with the fact that they're going to be moving guys around. Guys are going to be not necessarily out of position, but they're going to have guys at multiple positions. And I guess they're trying to figure out who's going to be the best fit where and all of that. What are the advantages to moving everybody around? And then what are the negatives to just moving everybody around? And I think you and I are on the same page with this, but I'm very interested to see what your opinion is, because I've got something for both. That's for sure.
I think it depends on the player.
Yeah.
I think for a guy like Blake Fisher, I'm fine moving him to a different position every day and letting him learn a little bit, because he's not necessarily competing for a starting job. He could win a starting job, but he's not necessarily going into the spring thinking you're going to compete for a starting job. I think when you get in this situation, the positives are you're seeing who can fit somewhere. I mean, you may not know a guy could play a position until you move him there. Sure. You know, if they hadn't tried this with Jarrett Patterson, he wouldn't have been who he was. He'd probably still be a backup. If they didn't give him that shot to be a starter, we'd be like, well, how's this Patterson kid gonna handle now that Lee Meikenberg and Robert Hainsey are gone? So you do that and you see, well, who's comfortable somewhere? Hey, this guy's been on the right side his whole career. Let's put him on the left side. And he's like, wow, this guy plays even better left-handed than he does right-handed. And some guys you move over there and you're like, yeah, he can't play left-handed at all. And that matters for offensive linemen, because your stance is the opposite. I've said this before. It's like being a right-handed hitter your whole career and then trying to move to the left side.
Your first step is different.
Right. Your eye discipline is different. Everything is different. And then you switch to being a left-handed hitter. It's going to feel awkward. Some people can figure it out and become switch hitters. Some people can't. And so you have to learn that. You learn who can do what. I mean, I think there's only ever been one lineman in history that had a legitimate reason to be only one-sided. That was probably, remember Bob Whitfield for the Falcons? He was like blind in one eye, so he could only play left tackle.
That'll do it.
Serious. And so, I think that's a positive, but I also think that if you think certain guys are competing for starting positions, you need to leave them there. So, I'm told that Andrew Kristofic is competing for the starting left guard job with Dylan Gibbons. Well, Dylan Gibbons is playing guard for now going into his 5th year. Andrew Kristofic's been playing tackle his first 2 years.
Right.
So if he's going to learn guard enough to be legitimately contending against Dylan Gibbons or John Dirksen, then you got to give him a lot of guard reps, and moving him between guard and center doesn't make a lot of sense for me, because to me, you can cross train him later in spring and then in the summer on snapping. You don't need to spend a lot of reps doing that now. So, well, you don't have a lot of centers. Well, then put a walk on there or something like that, because you're trying to figure out what your starting lineup is. And to me, you can, the concern is that you can run the risk of not getting guys to develop at a position. And you say, well, Andrew Kristofic's not starting because he didn't play as well as Dylan Gibbons. Well, did you give him the opportunity to really learn and grow at a position that Dylan Gibbons has been playing for 4 years that he's never played?
Kind of a jack of all trades, master of none situation.
Exactly. Yeah. And that guy's not winning a starting job at a place like Notre Dame. And that's the concern for me. Brian Kelly talked recently about how, they moved Quinn Carroll back out to tackle. Well, you just moved him to guard. So when's he going to get a chance to get comfortable? And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to move all the guys all the time. Well, let me rephrase that. I get it. I think it makes some sense through 5, but pretty soon they're going to have to say, okay, well, we've given Kristofic enough center reps. We need to now let him focus on guard.
Yeah.
We've given Quinn Carroll enough tackle reps. We need to let him focus on guard.
And that was going to be my point, Brian. And I didn't mean to jump on you, but I did.
Go for it. You did. You might as well just turn into the skid, man. Turn into the skid.
But that's my point. Spring is for the beginning of spring is for experimentation. And I have no problem with that whatsoever, because like you said, some guys, right away when you put them in a position, that's not going to happen. It's just not going to work. and we tried it, and we're going back to what we were doing before. And then there's some guys that, hey, man, we can give this a shot.
I kind of like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's what the beginning of spring is for. And I had the first 6 practices. Yes, you experiment. You put guys all over the place, specifically with the offensive line. No problem with that. Once you hit about the halfway point, now it's time to start focusing on where you think that they are going to help you the most. And so, like you said, if Kristofic is going to be battling for that guard position, for a starting guard position, that's where he focuses. If he's battling for the starting guard and then the backup center job,
makes no sense.
The backup center job doesn't matter right this second. Right? Because worst case scenario, you put Jarrett Patterson in at center. So, I mean, you've got center, okay? I realize when you're putting the second team and the third team, you need a body. But like you said, you can put a walk-on in there. There's plenty of guys you can put in there to fill a spot. Let him compete. Let him compete for that job. If that's where you think he can help the most, you let him compete. Josh Lugg, for example, they've got him out at right tackle right now. I personally think he might be a better guard. So, are they, they're telling us that they're going to move him back over there? That's great. They should be moving him back and forth right now, not staying in that one spot and then staying in that spot. He should be going back and forth. And then you tell, okay, where's he going to help us the most? Or where does he have the best shot? Now, he's potentially the best guy at both positions. I get that. But where is the next guy with the best potential to start?
Where does him lining up make us the best as a unit?
Correct. Thank you for putting some English to what I was saying.
I knew what you were trying to say. I got you. I read you. I'm with you.
But I'm fine with the first 6, 7 practices doing, bouncing guys around, figuring out where everybody fits. But the second half, you need to have some stability, and you need to let those guys battle.
This is the point for me. I'm actually a little quicker on the draw than that. It'd be one thing if you're talking about a guy that is competing for a starting job. That's a little different. So if they think Quinn Carroll, for example, let's just use Quinn Carroll for example. If they think he can compete for a job, they're just not sure if it's going to be guard or tackle yet. Then switch him, move him, give him some reps at both. The issue that I have are the guys that are the kind of the cross training for center. Like if Michael Carmody is potentially a center for you, then get him some center reps, cross train him at center and tackle. No problem with that. So it's this my concern isn't for everyone. My concern is more for the people that you view as competing for a starting job.
Because Carmody's not competing for a starting job.
Well, I mean,
most likely
not. If he stands out, then sure. But I think he's a guy that could potentially be in that place, but like his situation is a little different than Kristofic's. To your point, Quinn Carroll's situation is a little bit different, and so for me, I'm no longer not wasting time. That sounds really rough, and that's not how I mean it. I'm not gonna now focus on cross training Andrew Kristofic anymore until we get to the summer and we get to maybe fall camp, and then you do it a little bit differently. I'm now saying, okay, we got you some work there. We have a general idea of what you can do at center. Now we're going to let you focus on guard, whether it's left or right. And now if you want to move them between left and right guard, that's a little different deal because both of those jobs are open. But he needs to now get reps at just guard moving forward.
Right.
And that's where he needs to be. Now, one thing that I would like I am curious about is I am curious if they're doing anything with Tosh Baker at right tackle. I've not seen any snaps of him at right tackle.
Yeah.
There's 2 ways to look at him, and this one's a little bit tougher. Number one is he's just 5 practices in, so let's give him more time at left tackle. The other one is, at what point in time do we say, I think Tosh is ready to play, but I don't know if he's ready to protect the backside of the quarterback, and say, let's get him at right tackle, and then we'll give Blake some left tackle reps and, just to get him some work. But Jarrett Patterson's going to be our left tackle.
Right.
Because Blake's just not quite ready yet. And so you're going to start him at right tackle. And then that's where you could maybe see him and Blake Fisher kind of playing in a similar role to what we saw from Kramer and Hainsey back in 2017.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what I'm curious to see how that goes. Because I know why they want to force the issue with Blake Fisher at left tackle. There's the attractiveness of having a 6'8", really athletic kid on the back side, but I think that's also a lot of pressure for a redshirt freshman.
Sure.
And it's a lot of pressure that the only left tackle we've seen do that as a redshirt freshman was Zach Martin. And like Ronnie Stanley started at right tackle as a redshirt freshman. Mike McGlinchey started at right tackle as a redshirt sophomore, I think is when he first got his first gig. Actually, he was a redshirt freshman when he got that start against LSU in the bowl game. Then the next year, 2015, he was a redshirt sophomore
when he was a full-time starter.
Became a full-time starter at right tackle. Then he moved to the left side.
Yep.
Liam Eichenberg never really played right tackle, at least not like in a starting role, but he got some reps at right tackle. But he also didn't get a starting job until he was a redshirt sophomore at left tackle. So it's a little different situation. But that's the one I'm really interested to see. That's still the question mark for me, because I understand why they haven't moved Blake yet, and I don't even know if now is the time to consider moving him to right tackle. You may just say, hey, let's go through all 15 and let him get work there, and then see what we got at right tackle, and then you can say, okay, let's work on now going into the spring. Jarrett's back. We're going to slide Jarrett in there, and you're going to be the right tackle, and see how that goes. And then if Jarrett is locking down a spot, and if Tosh is locking down a tackle spot, and you know that Josh Luck can play tackle, and you anticipate Jarrett Patterson having one of the tackle spots, at what point in time do you start giving Blake Fisher some guard reps to compete at guard? Sure. That's the other part of this. So there's still a lot of questions to be determined, Vince, and there's still guys that should get some movement. But again, that movement is designed to give them reps at positions where they're going to be starting. Mm-hmm. So that's the difference. The moving around for guys that are cross-training to be a backup at a position if you have a need,
right,
that needs to stop now. I understand why they did it. I get it, but that needs to stop now. And unless it's like a situation where, like, hey, Andrew Kristofic looks great at center, and Zeke Correll, maybe we need to move him to guard and let him battle somewhere else. Maybe something like that, but I don't see that.
Yeah.
And Brian Kelly has said Zeke's the starting center for right now. So I want to see those guys like Andrew Kristofic, Quinn Carroll start focusing just on the positions that they're competing to start at. And that's why for Kristofic, that means keep him at guard. For Carroll, that means guard and tackle. So again, it's not a blanket rule. It has to be applied differently to everybody based on where they are and their development. I'm okay. I'm okay if you want to play Michael Carmody at center, guard, and tackle at different times because you're still trying to figure out where he best fits. I get it, because he's not necessarily competing for a starting job. If you want to move Caleb Johnson around, I'm fine with that. If you want to give Rocco Spindler some snaps at center and tackle and guard, I'm fine with that, because I don't think Rocco's at a place yet where he's really competing for a starting job. Kristofic, however, needs to start getting exclusive guard reps. Now, you can go right, left. He needs to start getting exclusive guard reps, in my opinion.
So playing off your opinion, what you like that?
Yes.
So what is your right now as we sit here April 8th, right? They like you said, they just finished the 6th practice. What is your ideal offensive line?
I want to hear you. I want to hear you give your answer.
Oh, you're turning it around.
I did.
That's fine. I got it written down. I don't know if you noticed. I was taking some notes over here while we were talking, and I mentioned.
So the question, Vince, you're talking about ideal starting line now, or are you talking about projecting based on what we know right now? What is the ideal line for when they play Florida State? What's the
ideal for when they start against Florida State?
Okay.
So we have to project a little bit,
okay,
because guys are still moving around and things of that nature. But where would we be the most comfortable with the 5 guys that are on the field on September 5th?
Okay. All right, you first.
All right. So I think we can both agree Jarrett Patterson at left tackle. We're both pretty comfortable with that. I think we're both pretty comfortable with Zeke Correll at center. I don't think that there's any doubt that those two are pretty locked in. We know Josh Luck is going to start. It's whether he's going to start at guard or whether he's going to start at tackle. I know that there's a bit of a disagreement here, but I like Josh Luck at right guard. So I'm fitting him in at guard. And then I have to say, and you've convinced me that Tosh Baker is the guy for right tackle. And I love the idea of a young guy starting at right tackle and then eventually moving over to left tackle. So I like him there. Left guard is probably my biggest question mark, because I think that there's talent there. I love the fact that you told me what you're hearing is that Dylan Gibbons is fighting his butt off for that spot. I love that. And so, to be honest with you, I'm fine with either Dylan Gibbons or Kristofic starting at left guard right now. At the moment, since I've heard that he's fighting hard, he's a 5th year, wants that spot.
Big, strong kid, too.
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of rooting for him to get the spot, to be honest with you. So I'm good with either Gibbons or Kristofic there at left guard. But I think that would be my line moving forward.
We're pretty much on the same page. I would like to see Jarrett Patterson at left tackle. And look, Tosh is the left tackle of the future. There's no doubt. I mean, I had him ranked as a top 50 recruit. I just feel like, don't mess with what's worked for you. And what's worked for you is, not throwing a young guy into the mix. I think Zach Martin, to me, was a bit of an anomaly. And Zach Martin was also thrust into a situation where when he started at left tackle, you had terrible offensive line depth, and you were in a brand new program. It was Brian Kelly's first year, Harry Heastand's first year. I mean, that was Ed Warner's first year.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
As the offensive line coach. And who was going to start if it wasn't Zach Martin? You didn't have the options and the depth that you have now. So I like that right tackle. I think, kind of easing him into that starting lineup, taking a little bit of the pressure. If they are going to be inconsistent, let that inconsistency be right in the quarterback's face. Because then as a quarterback,
you can see it.
Yes. I would much rather be comfortable with the left side, my blind side, than even in a shotgun. I still would feel it's not quite as important in a shotgun. But Notre Dame,
because you're not dropping.
Correct.
When you drop, you've got your back to that side the whole time, unless you're doing that weird straight back drop back
thing.
But
I don't think anyone does that anymore. It's like so 1970s and 1980s. I think for me, but even in shotgun, you're still turning and squaring up at some point in time. And and there's still a lot of wide rushing coming. And also Notre Dame does enough under center to where, they're not like Ohio State. They're not exclusively in the shotgun. So they do things under center. And so I think that would be why I just would want the more veteran players. And I get it, length and all that kind of stuff. I would like to have the more veteran player back there. And if you get to the first couple weeks of fall camp and Jarrett Patterson can't play left tackle, and you just move Tosh back there.
And so be it. Yeah.
But I would give Tosh all the left tackle reps in the spring, or at least a lot of them, maybe give him a little bit of work at right tackle late in the spring, just to give him a taste and see how he does playing right-handed. Because you want to have an idea going into the summer if he can even get in the right-handed stance.
Sure. Absolutely.
Because I don't know if he's done that, but I mean, he was a left tackle in high school and he's a left tackle now. So, I mean, you need to get a taste of that. But I'd like to see Jarrett Patterson left tackle. I'd like to see, I get what you're saying about Dylan Gibbons. I get it. I think that if Dylan Gibbons wins the job, I'm fine with that. Totally fine with that. I still think that Andrew Kristofic has the higher ceiling.
Sure.
But at some point in time, your potential has to become production. And if you can't beat out Dylan Gibbons, then Dylan Gibbons is clearly the better player. So I just want to see him get that opportunity, because if Dylan Gibbons wins the job in that circumstance, then you say the best man won the job.
Yep.
But if Dylan Gibbons wins the job because they continue to move Andrew Kristofic around every day, then you say, well, did you really have a competition there where you had everyone at their best? And then you start to ask some questions. So I think even for Dylan Gibbons, it'd be good to allow Andrew Kristofic to just be there, because then if he wins the job, he won the job. Center, Zeke Correll. Obviously, we've talked about that one. That one to me is a no-brainer for now. Yeah. Right guard, Josh Lugg is where I'd put him. And then right tackle, I'd have Tosh Baker at right tackle. And then what I would like to see happen is to have Tosh and Blake Fisher both getting right tackle reps. I don't know if I would advocate for what we saw in 2017, where it was literally every other series.
Yeah.
But I would at least maybe go every third, something like that, where it's a legitimate rotation where you're letting both of those guys. I mean, we've seen it work, right? The only year Notre Dame did that, they won the Joe Moore Award.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, and it wasn't just because they had Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey. That was a big part of it, but Sam Mustipher was pretty flipping good that year. Alex Bars was pretty freaking good that year. And the right tackles played well that year. I mean, I still remember Tommy Kramer against Michigan State in 2017. You remember that, Vince? He had like multiple pancakes. I remember the one long run that they had. And remember, Michigan State that year finished second nationally in rush defense. Notre Dame went for like $180 something. And that was with Josh Adams getting hurt. Dexter Williams got hurt. Tony Jones was already out because he got hurt the week before against Boston College. They had Deion McIntosh playing almost the entire second half, and they still went for $180 plus. And I remember the one long run Josh Adams had in the first half before he got hurt, where Tommy Kramer just comes off, and I think it was that Kenny Willekes kid. It was like an all Big Ten guy. Drove him like 7 yards down the line and then just planted him. And Josh Adams cut right behind him. And so what that allowed them to do was you had Hainsey was a better pass blocker. Kramer was the better run blocker. So like when they'd get in like 2-minute situations or situations where they had to throw it more, even if it was Kramer's series, they'd put Robert Hainsey back in. Well, it's a very similar thing to what I see now, where Tosh Baker's more of a pass blocker. Blake Fisher's probably more advanced as a run blocker. And so it gives you – so there may be some weeks where maybe Blake plays a little bit more at right tackle because you're trying to run it. But I like that kind of rotation at right tackle. You have a veteran player on the inside of him, which is also true in 2017 because remember, Alex Barr started in 20s. He was a second-year starter. So you have a Josh Lugg who's not technically a returning starter but has 9 career starts under his belt. He's a fifth-year senior. And then you've got your stud at left tackle. So to me, that would be my ideal offensive line based on what we know right now.
Yeah,
that would be what I'd like to go with.
Let me ask you a caveat question to this. If Tosh Baker doesn't pan out at right tackle, do you move Josh Lugg to right tackle and let people battle it out for guard?
I'd probably still move. I think the thing with Josh Lugg is you need to play him where you think he's going to be the best.
Sure.
That to me is what I would say. Play him where you think he's going to be the best. But they say, okay, well then who's going to be the right tackle? That's a good question. And that's the tough spot that Notre Dame finds themselves in. And that's why they need to give Blake Fisher every opportunity this spring to prove that he can play the position or not. I don't know if I would love the idea of Blake Fisher being a full-time starter at right tackle, but if he wins the job, he wins the job.
If he wins the job, that's
incredibly talented player. I mean, he was my number 1 offensive recruit in the 2021 class, so I'm not going to be shocked. And he's got a bit of an advantage on most freshmen in that if anything, most freshmen come into Notre Dame, they got to gain weight. Blake Fisher's coming to Notre Dame saying, if I drop 5 or 10 pounds, that's only going to be better for me because he's just such a big – just naturally – a huge kid. If you've ever been up close and personal with Blake Fisher, you realize, he's just monstrous. Giant head, big broad shoulders, big arms, big waist, big hips, big feet. big, huge hands. He's just a big kid. He's not like this giant fat kid that you need to work 40 pounds off. He's just big. He's a lot like Quentin Nelson. Quentin Nelson was he's 340 now in the NFL. You look at Quentin Nelson, he ain't fat.
Right. No.
You know what I mean?
No,
he's just thick. He's monstrous. He's just broad shoulders, long arms, big head, big feet. And that's how Blake Fisher is. And so that's kind of the other thing is, okay, ultimately the other part of that caveat question is, Vince, is where do you ultimately see Blake Fisher's best position being?
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Because if you see his best position ultimately being guard, and he's proven to be one of your better guys, then say, okay, move him into right guard. And then maybe you do with Tosh Baker what I was saying to do with Blake Fisher. So maybe with Josh Lugg and Tosh Baker, you say at right tackle, you say, okay, Josh is our starter, but every third or fourth series, we're going to put Tosh in there and give him some work. And then you let Blake battle for the right guard position. That's where there's a lot of things that could happen. So when I say this is my ideal line, I think we also need to also not be so stubborn that we've locked into our ideal lines, and that's what it's going to be. And if it's not that, then they're screwing up. We got to let it develop. We got to let it pan out. I may think Tosh Baker should be the guy at right tackle, but by the end of spring, Tosh Baker may be like, no, I got this left thing locked down. We don't know that yet, but that's the whole point of this conversation is it's super early and there's going to be change. And maybe Zeke Correll isn't ready to play center. Maybe he needs to be a guard. Maybe Andrew Kristofic, the light goes on at center and he's so good at center that you're like, well, maybe we should move Zeke somewhere and let him. We don't have an idea. We have no idea what's going to happen these next 10 practices. So that's why I say that's my ideal lineup now, but we will address this again after the Blue Gold game.
Oh, we will.
And we'll address this in the fall camp because I do think there's still a lot of, let's put it this way. My ideal lineup that I wrote down is written in pencil and I wrote it softly.
It's easy to erase.
Yes. No question.
That's great. So one of the things we like to do is we like to make some predictions, Brian. So I want give me a prediction on the offensive line that maybe something we haven't talked about yet.
That we haven't talked about yet? I think we covered everybody. So
you're right. It doesn't have to be that. As I said that, I realized I backed myself into a corner on what I was going to say. So just a prediction on the offensive line.
Yeah, I think my prediction is going to be, and it's not exactly a bold one, I think Blake Fisher is going to make it to the case of the coaches like, hey, you have to play me. You can justify not wanting to play a freshman all you want, which is the offensive line is still a position, Vince, where I advocate for freshmen not playing. But sometimes there's that unique case. And this is a unique case, too, because you say, well, Quentin Nelson didn't play as a freshman. Well, that was a different situation. Quentin Nelson came to Notre Dame. They had veteran players. They had Nick Martin, they had Matt Hegarty, they had Christian Lombard. They had a lot of veteran players. And, he was making a transition from tackle to guard. This is a little different situation where they don't have a bunch of returning starters coming back. Oh, and Steve Elmer was coming back too. And remember, Steve Elmer played as a freshman, started several games as a freshman. So there was a lot more of a proven. If Blake Fisher would have enrolled in 2020, we would be having a different conversation.
Absolutely, because there would be no spot. There's a ceiling he's going to hit.
Right. He's not beating out Tommy Kramer and Robert Hainsey and Aaron Banks and Liam Eichenberg. He's walking in at the perfect time.
Yeah.
He's going to play this year. Now, whether he starts or whether he's a rotation guy, every other series, or whether they just work him in from time to time, maybe they put him in a goal line package or something like that. At some point in time, Blake Fisher's just going to be too good not to play. Now, whether that's against Florida State or in October, November, I don't know. But Blake Fisher's going to play this year. So, again, not a bold prediction. Hey, my number one recruit in the class is going to play as a freshman. Oh, wow. Way to go on a limb there, Driscoll.
Yeah.
But to me, that's the most obvious one at this point. And it also speaks to just how little we know about all those other positions.
Well, that's true, too, because we're going off of our, very limited amount that we can see and what we've been told as well. I'm kind of changing mine up a little bit just based on our conversation today. I'm going to go and I'm going to say that Dylan Gibbons wins the left guard spot. Maybe it's the name Dylan. Maybe it's just the fact that I feel like he's been around for a while and he's worked hard. And the fact that you led with, we're hearing really good things about Dylan Gibbons fighting and wanting that job. That I don't know why that gets me excited. But it does. I
think it's because you always like that underdog story.
I do.
He was a 3-star recruit. He was kind of buried in the depth chart, and just some people even said, is he even going to be brought back for a 5th year? He's battled injuries. So it's a good story.
It's a great story.
And he's a tough, mean kid. That's the thing is,
that's what I want as a guard, though.
Dylan is to the guard position what Kurt Hinish is to the nose tackle position from an attitude standpoint. Where you're almost like, hey man, chill out with the cheap shot. Chill. The whistle blew, brother. This your teammate, and that's kind of how Kurt Hinish is at nose tackle. It's like, hey, man, same team, man, you know.
I kind of want that from my guards, though.
But see, if Kurt Hinish isn't that way, he doesn't play. It's kind of like that scene from Rudy. Hey, you need to tone it down. I'm like, if I tone it down, I'm not here anymore. And that's the thing.
Exactly right.
If Kurt Hinish tones that down, then you're taking away what makes him as effective as he is, despite the fact he doesn't have the size, athleticism, and all the other traits that you really look for in a Notre Dame nose tackle. But he's a really good player because he doesn't think he doesn't have those tools. He thinks he's the best dang player out there, and he's going to go prove he's going to have that edge to him.
Absolutely.
And I think Dylan has a little bit of that at guard.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do.
I like that little bit of dog in a guard. You know what I mean? Yeah. You're playing in the middle. You're going up against linebackers, nose tackles. Mm-hmm. I like that fight in a guard. So
as long as it's not crossing the line and getting you penalties.
Completely agree with that. So that's going to be my bold prediction. I think Dylan Gibbons is going to win that job. So
that actually is a little bit more of a bold prediction than, the 5-star right tackle, number 1 player in the class is going to start at right tackle.
We'll see.
Whatever.
Maybe
it's not going to start, but it's going to play. So it'd been more bold if I'd have said Blake Fisher's going to start this year. But
that's true.
I'm not ready to put that kind of pressure on him or hype on him just yet. But
absolutely.
I have had people tell me that. I've had people that have been at practice tell me he's going to start it right. He's going to start.
That's crazy. Crazy, but just wow. He must really.
And it's not.
Something.
And it's not about the other guys are struggling. It's not. It's just man that how it is. You can just see a guy and be like, hey, that dude's different. And first time you see a guy like,
it reminds me of Robert Hainsey when he was a freshman. You know what I mean? Yeah. He just came in and he forced himself onto the field.
Yeah, but what I mean is like there's just some guys you just look at and you say that dude plays the game at a different level than everybody else. That guy's guy's got something special. Even though he didn't play as a freshman, even with Quentin Nelson, you just kind of knew. You heard enough stories from people at that time that like, this kid didn't play, but he's gonna be really good. He's gonna be he's special. You heard that immediately with Quentin Nelson. He just had to learn the position.
Sure.
And that's kind of how it is with Blake. It's like there's just something different about that kid that he has some things you can't teach. You can't teach his size and length, and then that combination of athleticism that comes with it. It's like with Tosh Baker. You can't teach 6'8" with really long arms and a kid who was a pretty nifty low post scorer in basketball. You just can't teach those things, and so I think that's why those two players more than any others sort of entice you because they just have those things that you're like, I want that in my lineup, And now we'll see if they're able to lock it down and prove that they have the ability to play consistently, because talent and upside doesn't work on the offensive line if it's not consistent.
Absolutely.
Because that gets you beat, that gets your quarterback drilled. You need some consistency there. That's the one position in football where I'd take the lesser talented player that I know can at least get the job done snap after snap than the dominant player who's going to blow you up 2 snaps and then get beat 2 snaps. Maybe that's just a former quarterback in me talking.
Yeah, no, I know
that the quarterback's the brunt of the mistakes more often than not.
Sure.
But that's just kind of how I feel. And other positions I don't feel that way, but offensive line, I'm much more there's a level of consistency is needed. You have to get to a certain level of consistency before I can seriously say that you need to be battling for a starting job.
Either way, it's going to be fun to watch this group.
Yeah.
And there's going to be 4 new numbers out there that weren't starting a year ago. And I'm really interested to watch just kind of the maturation process of these guys and where they end up and where the coaches think that they're going to be the most effective, because they're the ones that get to see the 100+ snaps. We do not at this point. So hopefully I've got my fingers crossed that we're going to see some fall camp, Brian. I'm hoping we get to see some fall camp, because that's when all the decisions really start to get made, and that's when we get to really see some good stuff. But that doesn't take away from what they're doing in the spring. And again, there's 6 practices.
The work is going on, whether we can see it or not.
You got that right.
The work's being put in, no matter whether we can see it or not.
You got that right. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Brian, thanks for joining me today. Make sure everybody checks out irishbreakdown.com, because there's been some good stuff going up there lately on spring practice and kind of the stuff that Brian's hearing. Make sure that you subscribe on our YouTube channel, hit that notification button, and of course, wherever you get your podcasts. So for Brian Driscoll, he's the publisher. I'm Vince D'Addario. I am the football analyst, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.